Well, we are joined now in studio by the Minister of Communications, Minister Mmamoloko Kubayi. A very good morning to you, Minister. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Of course, Minister. Now, your initial reaction to Multichoice's decision actually not to renew ANN7's contract has been criticized by a few people. In hindsight, do you think that your stance perhaps was not in line with the mandate of your ministry?
Actually, I've been criticized both sides. There are those who feel that I must get in and get involved, which I shouldn't. That's not in line with my ministry. There are those that are thinking that I'm actually defending ANN7 because it's aligned to ANC. So there are two issues here. I have to remain neutral, protect the interest of government. So the stance I took is definitely correct.
And is it possible for the government to shut its eyes to this injustice in the private sector or the private space, saying that they have no role to play when your ministry must actually provide protection and the environment needed for new players, especially black players, to emerge in this industry?
I think let's start here. What is the legal framework? What does the legislation say? So that we don't generalize on issues. And I think your question is very generic and makes assumption. First thing is that there are legal frameworks that as a minister you operate on. Secondly, the contract between Multichoice and ANN7, it's a contract between two parties. Now, if there are contractual difficulties between the parties, ANN7 and Multichoice must sit around the table. I think I've been on record since last year, speaking to say we can never have where a news channel is closed because of different views. And Multichoice is saying, this is not the same. This is not the issue. The contract has come to an end, and therefore there's opportunities for engagement going forward. Now, this is what we need to deal with. As a minister, do I have a legal framework? And I think I'm not so sure if you've looked at the statement as ANN7 that I've issued, because the statement says, we as government are recognizing that there's a policy and legislative gap where we should be able to say, and I'll make an example, we should be able to say when something like this happens, how do you come in? In the mobile network operators, for example, if you are to get rid of assets or you are to acquire certain assets as a licensee, there are steps that you follow, and then you have to comply with those things. Now, in the broadcasting space where there's pay TV, remember, these are pay TVs, not your free-to-air that I have obligations to. That's one. So pay TVs, we need to regulate them, and we are saying there's a gap. And there are issues to say from our side to say, are we going to regulate this in such a way that we put regulations through ICASA or other things? Now, as a minister, as you are saying that, shouldn't we have done something? Are we closing? As a minister, as we are saying that there's a gap that exists, we are going to look at closing that gap. But equally, there are institutions that ANN7 as a private party has legal recourse on. For example, ANN7 can decide to approach ICASA. They are free to do that. ANN7 can approach Competition Commission. It's within, because ANN7 is a private party. It's not a government entity.
Now, Minister, you also said that you welcome the entry of a new black player who would actually get the Multichoice platform, the one that was once held by ANN7. Do you think it's possible to create an investment-heavy broadcast station overnight?
Again, I think what I'm going to appeal to the ANN7 team together with its leadership, put emotions aside, look at the issues and facts. What is happening here is that Multichoice is bringing more additional. This is about transformation. This is about more players. My responsibility as a minister is to have diverse views. Now, if as a minister I can cross the line and have a particular preference, then I'll be acting illegally. So we must be able to try and look at things objectively and say, in terms of the legal framework, from the point of a minister, what is the minister required to do?
Now, Minister, you have mentioned that there is a bit of a policy gap and that you are working to close those gaps in policy. If I may actually ask, how many black owners so far have approached you with serious proposal to actually start a new TV stations? And is the government perhaps looking at maybe in the future subsidizing to help those companies start up and get off the ground?
So far, I've never had any approach on TVs. Mainly people who talk is people who want to start community radio stations, community newspapers, and we always forward that to MDDA. So we do not have, as government, any funding for TV channels. that in terms of community radios and media, we always give them to media development diversity for us to handle. As a department, we don't have fund. As you would be aware, our budget as a department is very, very little. A major part of our work is to do digital migration. And I think one of the things that this example says to us is that the delays in delivering digital migration has effects, because if we have digital platforms, would be able to have diverse views, would have to have a lot of opportunities for a lot of players.
And Minister, this step that's taken by Multichoice is seen by many that as a step that's going to actually take us back 20 years in terms of freedom of expression. And we're going to go back to the place where we just have the state broadcaster and ENCA having free reign with no sort of competitive voice. It's a regressive step, Minister. Is there anything that the department can do? I mean, are their hands washed clean of this because it's in the private sector? Is it just out of their reach?
That's why I spoke about policy gap, because in terms of media diversity, we do have a responsibility as the department. So we need to ensure that there's diverse views, and the statement that we've issued actually spoke to that, to say, in line of having diverse views as a country, it's important to ensure that we protect those. So that is important, and the regulator, which is ICASA, has an obligation to ensure that in terms of diversity, in terms of license issuing, in terms of players within the sector, they are ensuring diverse views. So there is a role that we are playing in terms of issuing. You would note that ICASA recently issued a request for people who want to be licensed into the free-to-air. There are several people who have applied that are being looked at, and ICASA will make announcement in terms of those applications who qualify, so that we continue as government to create open and diverse views in the sector.
Ms., you actually represent a party that wants diversification in the media industry. You know, they've actually mentioned it, ANC has mentioned it before, and you've stated that as a ministry you have to actually look into the policies. Is this something that's going to take a few years, a few months? How long will it take to actually look at the policies, you know, get them, pass them into law and have them become effective, so that all sorts of TV stations, whether black-owned or, you know, mixed-race owned, can actually have a voice and have a way to, a foot to stand on, if I can put it that way?
No, definitely, because for us, we have to do the analysis first. It will be very difficult to say how long it will take, because if we do we decide that it just needs regulations, which can be issued through ICASA, it will be quicker. But if it requires legislative amendment, it might take long. So it will be a matter of us analyzing. And I need to say this because our concern is to say, if something like this can happen to ANN7, I can tell you now, ENCA is not safe. SABC on the platform is equally not safe. So it's not about issues of ANN7 only. It's about ensuring that all players are protected. And I want to say this because the concern equally from our side as minister and government is that there are employees who are in ANN7. We are in the interest of not shedding jobs, but to make sure that the jobs are saved as well. So it's the year of jobs. So part of that issue is to say, I mean, I had an interview early in one radio station, and I was accused of being protective to ANN7, by the way. And which I'm saying, no, we have a duty as government. So there's mixed reactions, and what I'm appealing to everybody is to say, let's not be emotional about the issues. Let's leave the politics aside. Let's look at factual issues. Let's engage legally to say, what are the legal steps that can be taken? What are the options that everybody has? What are the legal recourse ANN7 has, so that the matter can be resolved properly?
Just to get it back on the record, Minister, it's not is it the responsibility of the ministry or the responsibility of ANN7 as a station to go to various places like the ICASA and Competition Commission?
No, ANN7 as a party that is aggrieved has the right to do that. So nothing stops. ANN7 can't fold its arms when something, because I do not have access to the contractual contracts between Multichoice and ANN7. And because I'm a third party, I can't have access to them. So it's only ANN7 knows what is contained in their contract with Multichoice that can argue a particular angle. I can go to ICASA and say this is what, but it will be on a broader perspective. to say, can we make sure that something like this doesn't happen? Investigate what has happened with ICASA, and it can come investigate what happened between Multichoice and ANN7. And you'd recall that there's already an investigation that ICASA is currently doing. I don't know if you've seen the statement issued by ICASA yesterday as well. That they are already doing an investigation. So it's not something that still has me to do anything. ICASA has taken it up, but I think ANN7 itself has to look at the matter, they know what their contract is, look at their contractual obligations and what Multichoice has. As a third party, as I'm saying, it's difficult to get into that space. And I might be taken to court because I'll be seen as interfering.
Now, Minister, you have mentioned time and again during this interview that there's various legal recourse that the station can take. Just to assure the 200-odd people who work for ANN7, they've battled all sorts of crises, humiliation, violence, ostracization. They too have a right to do their journalism. And this government, under your leadership, is it willing to protect the freedom of journalists to actually express their work without being criticized by perhaps even our colleagues, just because of who the owner of the station we work for is?
That is enshrined actually in the Constitution. The freedom of expression, everybody has the right. The issue of independent editorial policy must be protected. So whoever feels what way about ANN7, ANN7 has a right to their independent editorial policy. So they should never be intimidated. No one has the right to do that, actually. And anyone who does that contravenes the Constitution.
I'm going to have to ask a question that might put you on the spot. You just let us know if you can answer it. Will you, as a minister, actually support the FTA license for ANN7? Because government is actually releasing licenses, as you mentioned earlier, free-to-air licenses. Will you support the FTA license for ANN7?
If I say so, then I'll be contravening the law. If I say I'm supporting or not supporting, it will be in contravention of the law. I should never find myself acting very illegal as a minister.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Minister of Communications, Minister Mmamoloko Kubayi, just talking to us about her sentiments regarding the reaction to Multichoice's decision to actually suspend ANN7's contract, and just letting us know the legal options that ANN7 as a TV station has available to it, and the role that government as well as the Communication Ministry plays. Just joining us there this morning, giving us her reactions.